The bridesmaid dress arrived in the wrong size. Not the wrong shade, not the wrong length, the wrong size. I wear an 8. The dress was a 12. I know because I had given Patricia Callahan my measurements 3 times, twice over the phone and once in writing in a text message she read and responded to with a thumbs up emoji. And still, a 12 showed up at my hotel door the morning of Celeste's wedding, wrapped in tissue paper and a note in my mother's handwriting that said, "So excited for today. I want you to understand something before I go any further. My mother does not make mistakes like that. Not with measurements, not with dinner seating, not with the precise arrangement of who gets what in our family. Patricia Callahan is a meticulous woman. Everything she does is done on purpose." I took the dress to a tailor 2 mornings before the rehearsal and paid $90 to have it taken in. I didn't tell anyone. I just fixed it and moved on, the way I have been fixing things and moving on my entire life. My name is Maya Callahan. I am 32 years old. I grew up in the same house as my sister Celeste. We ate at the same kitchen table, rode to the same school, attended the same church on Easter Sunday, and somehow lived completely different childhoods. Celeste had everything. I had what was left. What happened at her wedding 3 weeks ago didn't just confirm a suspicion I had been carrying since I was old enough to understand that something was wrong. It answered the one question that 32 years of living inside that family could never explain. The answer was in our DNA. If you're already connecting with this story, please hit the like button and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Cedar Grove, Michigan. Population 11,000, give or take. The kind of town where the hardware store owner knows your father's name, your grandfather's name, and the last time your roof needed replacing. The Callahans were known there. Not wealthy, not prominent, but known the way families become known when they stay in one place long enough to become part of the scenery. Robert Callahan spent 24 years in the claims department at First Meridian Insurance. He drove a gray Buick, coached 1 season of youth baseball when Celeste was 8, and served as an usher at Grace Fellowship Church for over a decade. Patricia Callahan taught piano lessons out of the living room every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. A rotating lineup of children would come through our front door while I sat at the kitchen table doing homework, listening to the same beginner scales played imperfectly, over and over, while my mother corrected with patience and warmth I rarely saw directed at me. From the outside, we looked like what we were supposed to look like. A family. 2 daughters, 2 parents, a brick colonial with white trim on Alderton Street, a wreath on the door at Christmas, a vegetable garden that Patricia kept with the same quiet competence she applied to everything. From the inside, the math was different. Celeste was 2 years younger than me, and she was treated 10 years older in every way that mattered. Her bedroom was at the front of the house. I know the dimensions because I measured both rooms once with the tape measure from the garage when I was 13. Hers was 14 by 16, freshly painted every few years in whatever color she chose. She had her own bathroom and a closet organizer with labeled sections. My room was 9 by 11, situated directly above the furnace room, which meant the floor was warm in winter and the smell of ductwork was a permanent feature of the air. I had 1 rod for hanging clothes and a single shelf that my father had nailed in crookedly on a Saturday afternoon and never came back to fix. I shared the hallway bathroom. I want to be careful here, because I know how this can sound. I know there are harder childhoods than mine and I am not claiming otherwise. I had a roof and meals and a school to go to. I am not asking for grief you have reserved for larger tragedies. What I am telling you is that when the specific, consistent, one-directional nature of a family's treatment becomes clear enough, it stops being a series of small incidents and becomes a system. And a system runs on logic. Even when that logic is buried. My half-portion at dinner was the first thing I was old enough to name. I was 8 years old. Thursday evening, pot roast. My father served the plates from the stove, and when he set mine in front of me, the white of the ceramic was visible around the edges. Half a portion. I looked at Celeste's plate. I looked at his. I said nothing. At 8, you do not say anything. You eat what you are given and you decide that you must have done something wrong, that you must be the explanation for your own diminishment. I stopped deciding that around age 12. By then the pattern was too clear for self-blame to survive it. New school clothes appeared in Celeste's closet every September. I wore her hand-me-downs, which should tell you something by itself. She was 2 years younger than me. I was wearing the clothes of a girl 2 sizes smaller and 2 years my junior because no one had bothered to buy me anything new. Celeste's birthday parties had catered food and a guest list that filled the living room. Mine had a grocery store cake and the same 3 cousins every year until I turned 14 and told my parents I didn't want a party, which was not entirely true, but which I suspected would relieve everyone involved. The birthday party thing took me years to name clearly. It wasn't that they forgot my birthday. It was that the celebration of me cost less, took up less space, and generated less warmth in that house. Not because they were poor. Robert Callahan's salary at First Meridian put us solidly in the middle class. They were not stretching to get Celeste what she had. They were choosing it. My father was not violent. I want to say that plainly. He never raised his voice in a way that frightened me, never threatened me, never left a mark. What Robert Callahan did was quieter and, in some ways, harder to name and therefore harder to escape. He was absent in a precise and directional way, the way a room is cold when the heat has been deliberately redirected somewhere else. He came to Celeste's school plays, her recitals, her 3 years on the junior soccer team. He was present for those. He attended one of my school events in 12 years. My 8th grade graduation. He spent most of it standing in the back of the gymnasium talking to another parent, and he left before the reception. He hugged Celeste good morning. Every single day. I watched it the way you watch something that is both ordinary and impossible. She would come downstairs and he would open his arms and she would walk into them without breaking stride, like gravity. For me, the mornings were a glass of orange juice placed on the counter, not handed to me, just placed there, and a nod if he was in a good mood. Most mornings, I poured my own juice. My mother's version of the imbalance was more sophisticated because Patricia is a sophisticated woman. She did not coldly ignore me the way Robert did. She included me in the language of family while excluding me from the substance of it. She said both of my girls in front of company. She asked about my grades, my friends, my plans. What she did not do was advocate for me. When the portion sizes were wrong, she served her own plate and sat down. When I needed new shoes and the answer was a long silence and then nothing, she did not press the issue. When I got into 4 colleges at 17 and came home with the acceptance letters spread across the kitchen table, she looked them over with an expression I now recognize as rehearsed neutrality and said nothing while she waited for Robert to speak first. Robert said we didn't have money for college. I needed to figure something out. Celeste started at Whitmore University the following fall. Private school, $54,000 a year. Tuition, housing, the sorority fee, the spring break trip. I found out the number from a cousin who mentioned it casually, not realizing I wasn't supposed to know. I put myself through community college working 30 hours a week at a pharmacy on Route 12. Then I transferred to Michigan State on a partial academic scholarship and 2 loans that took me 9 years to pay off. I earned my CPA license on the first attempt, joined Brennan Financial Group in Detroit, and 6 years later opened my own accounting practice with 11 clients and enough retained earnings to not need anyone to co-sign anything. I'm telling you this not because I want your admiration. I'm telling you because the distance between Celeste's path and mine was not the distance of capability or ambition. It was the distance of resources deliberately withheld from one daughter and just as deliberately given to another. The question that lived in me through all of it was never why don't they love me. I had stopped expecting that kind of answer by 20. The question was smaller and somehow worse, why her and not me? What was the operating logic? I had theories. I cycled through them the way you work a loose tooth, obsessively, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you can't leave it alone. Maybe I was too serious, too unlike the daughter Patricia had envisioned. Maybe I reminded Robert of something unpleasant, some failure or disappointment I was too young to have caused but old enough to represent. Maybe Celeste was simply easier to love and they had never developed the discipline to love what was harder. None of those theories were adequate. They never fully explained the degree of it, the precision of the differential, the consistency of it over 28 years without a single sustained deviation. Systems that consistent usually have a logic underneath them. I just hadn't found it yet. The wedding invitation arrived in late February. Cream cardstock, gold lettering, the kind of envelope you open carefully so you don't tear the flap. Celeste Renee Callahan and Vincent Andrew Mercer request the honor of your presence. April 12. A hotel ballroom in Cedar Grove, black tie, dinner, and dancing to follow. Vincent Mercer was 34, worked in private equity, and was, as far as I could determine, a genuinely decent person. He remembered details from previous conversations. He asked follow-up questions. He was not the source of any of my problems and I had no issue with him. He loved Celeste, and Celeste, whatever the complicated texture of our relationship, had never been the architect of what was done to me. She was the beneficiary of it. Those are different things, though they are sometimes hard to keep separate in practice. Patricia called 3 days after the invitations mailed. Not to ask if I was coming, she told me I was in the wedding party, that the dresses had been ordered, that rehearsal dinner was the Friday prior. Her voice had the brisk efficiency of a woman planning an event in which my presence was logistical rather than personal. I had spent the prior 6 years building careful distance from my family. Not a dramatic rupture, no scene at a holiday table, no list of grievances delivered with the momentum of a long-postponed reckoning. Just distance. My own apartment in Detroit. My own routines. Calls every few weeks, a Christmas visit, enough contact to maintain the surface without disturbing what was underneath. I had arrived at something I called peace, though it was really the peace of a wound that has healed over without being properly cleaned, functional, mostly painless, but not actually resolved. I went to the wedding because Celeste had asked for me specifically. Not Patricia choreographing it, not Robert's instruction. Celeste herself had called 2 weeks after the invitation and said, "I want you there, Maya. I want my sister." There was something unguarded in her voice that I hadn't heard often, and it reached something in me that the careful distance had not fully insulated. I said yes. I flew into Detroit Metro on Thursday evening. Rented a car. Drove to the hotel where the wedding block was reserved, checked in, took the elevator to the 4th floor, and found my room at the end of the hall. Smaller than the suites Patricia had booked for herself and Robert and Celeste's closest friends, but mine. Clean, quiet, containing nothing that required me to perform. I ordered room service and answered 3 client emails before going to sleep. The rehearsal dinner was Friday evening in the hotel's private dining room. Round tables, low lighting, a set menu chosen without anyone consulting my dietary preferences. Patricia was already there when I arrived, working the room the way she has always worked rooms, a hand on a shoulder here, a warm laugh there, the performance of a woman at the center of something important. Celeste moved through the space in a white wrap dress, luminous with the particular energy of someone 24 hours from their own wedding. Vincent's family occupied the far tables, his parents, 2 brothers, a cluster of cousins who all looked like slightly different versions of him. My father found me near the end of the cocktail hour. He was holding a glass of club soda and wearing the expression he reserves for situations where he does not know what to say and has decided not to say anything anyway. He asked about my drive. I told him it was fine. He nodded and moved on. Robert gave a toast at dinner. He talked about Celeste's warmth, her grace, the way she had brightened every room of their lives since the day she was born. He used the word daughter 3 times. He did not look at me during the toast except once, briefly, in a glance that found me and moved away without landing anywhere. I drove back to my room at 10:15. Sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the garment bag hanging on the closet door, and told myself I would get through tomorrow and then go home and that would be the end of it. The last time. The last toast, the last table arrangement, the last careful negotiation of how much of myself to bring into that room. That was the plan. Then Darcy happened. Darcy was Celeste's maid of honor, a woman who worked in tech and organized things with the velocity of a small weather event. She appeared at the bridal suite Saturday morning carrying a cardboard box and the energy of someone who had already been awake for 4 hours. "Okay, ladies." She set the box on the hotel vanity with the pride of a magician producing the good trick. "Vincent's family put these together for the wedding weekend. Part of the welcome package." She opened the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, were small, neatly packaged boxes. Each one bore a printed label, Mercer Callahan Family Celebration. Inside each, a consumer DNA testing kit. "Vincent's mom is obsessed with ancestry," Darcy explained, distributing them down the row of bridesmaids getting their hair done. "They're doing a whole family tree as a wedding gift. You just mail the sample in. Results come back in 3 weeks." I took the kit Darcy handed me and turned it over. Standard test. I had seen the advertisements 100 times. Ethnicity estimates, family matches, the appeal of the revelation. Patricia was seated in the corner chair having her hair pinned when Darcy offered her a kit. There was a pause. Not a long one, half a second, maybe. She took the kit with both hands and set it in her lap. She looked down at it for a moment longer than anyone else in that room. Then she smiled. "How fun," she said. I watched her face. I have been watching Patricia's face my entire life, cataloging the distance between what it shows and what it holds. The smile was technically correct. The eyes were computing something. I said nothing. I took the swab from my kit, collected the sample, sealed it, and handed it back to Darcy for packaging. Patricia did the same a beat later, the same practiced ease. Robert, I learned afterward, had declined when Vincent's father offered him a kit at the groom's suite that morning. "Too much trouble," he said. Not really his thing. I mailed my sample from the hotel business center on my way down to the ceremony. I didn't know until 3 weeks later that Patricia had retrieved her sealed sample from Darcy's collection box before it was mailed and dropped it in her hotel room trash. The wedding itself was beautiful. I mean that without reservation. The ceremony was sincere, the vows were specific and personal. Vincent cried in the way that makes a room trust a man. I held my flowers and stood in my properly fitted bridesmaid dress and felt what I usually feel at family occasions, a sort of distant ache, a watching from outside quality that I have come to accept as my particular way of moving through events like this. I hugged Celeste at the reception. She held on for a few seconds longer than I expected. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly, near my ear. I told her I was glad too, and in that moment I meant it. I flew home Sunday morning. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, I was at my kitchen table in Detroit reviewing a quarterly tax report for a client when my phone buzzed with a notification. DNA results ready. I had mostly forgotten about the kit. I set down the report, opened the app, and read. Ethnicity breakdown: Northwestern European, 71%. British and Irish, 19%. Broadly European, 10%. Exactly what you would expect for a family from the Midwest going back several generations. I scrolled down to the section that mattered less to me, DNA relatives. The top match was Celeste Callahan Mercer. 49.3% shared DNA. Relationship estimate: parent or full sibling. Expected. We were sisters. The second match stopped me. 46.8% shared DNA. Relationship estimate: parent or full sibling. The name listed was Thomas Reed. I read it again. Thomas Reed. The app estimated him as my parent or full sibling. I did not have a brother. I did not know anyone named Thomas Reed. I scrolled down through the suggested family tree the system had begun to construct. Cousins on the Reed side filled the lower entries, names I had never encountered, all of them connected back to a family from a small town in northern Michigan I had never visited or heard my parents mention. I went back to the top of the list and looked at it again. Celeste. Thomas Reed. A cluster of Reed cousins beneath him. No Callahans. Not one. No Robert Callahan, no Callahan cousins, no extended family connecting to the people who had raised me. The family I had grown up inside had left no mark in my DNA at all. I am an accountant. My entire professional life is built on the discipline of reading numbers and understanding what they actually mean, not what someone wishes they meant, not the most comfortable interpretation, but the conclusion the data requires. What the data required here was this: I shared nearly half my DNA with a man named Thomas Reed and nothing with the Callahan family. Which meant Robert Callahan was not my biological father. Which meant the family I had spent 32 years trying to understand had been built, at least in part, on something that had never been true. I sat at the kitchen table for 40 minutes without moving. The quarterly report was where I had left it. Outside, my neighbors were doing something ordinary: a car door, someone's dog, the unremarkable sounds of a Tuesday evening that had no idea what was happening in my kitchen. Then I picked up my phone and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. Patricia Callahan answers calls quickly. She always has. It is one of her small signals of control, the message being that she is never so occupied, never so absorbed in anything, that she cannot pivot immediately to the person trying to reach her. Availability as dominance. I had noticed it my whole life without having the language for it until I was older. Maya. Her voice had the particular warmth she used for family calls. Measured, pleasant, the exact temperature of a room that has been carefully thermostat. I did not do what I might have done at 22 or 25, launch in with accusations, give her the opening to defend, let her set the terms. I have an accountant's temperament. I read the full document before I respond to any single line of it. So I said, I got my DNA results back. A pause. The pause lasted 4 seconds. I counted because I was already counting everything. Oh? She said. How was that? Interesting, I said. I matched Celeste at 49%. Full sibling range, which makes sense. I kept my voice flat, informational. But my second highest match was someone I don't know. 46.8%. Parent or full sibling range. Silence. His name is Thomas Reed, I said. Does that name mean anything to you? The silence this time was longer. 7 seconds. Then she said something I had not expected. She did not say I don't know that name. She did not say there must be some mistake or those tests aren't reliable or any of the deflections I had prepared for. What she said was, how did you get that test? Not what does that mean? Not are you sure? She went straight to the source of the information, to how it had entered my hands, because the first instinct of a person managing a secret is not to question the content of the revelation, it is to identify the breach. I knew, in that moment, exactly what I was dealing with. The Mercer family distributed kits at the wedding, I said. I mailed mine from the hotel. Another silence. She was computing. Recalibrating. I could almost hear the architecture of the cover she had built over 32 years making its first structural sound. Maya, she said, and her voice had shifted. The measured warmth was gone. What replaced it was something older, flatter, the register of a woman who has stopped performing and started deciding. I want you to close that app and not look at it again until we've had a chance to talk in person. This isn't a conversation for the phone. Then tell me when we're talking in person. When I come to Detroit. Next week. We'll have dinner. I had been waiting my entire life for a dinner that would explain the math of my childhood. I told her I would be available Tuesday. She said she would confirm. We hung up. I held the phone in both hands and looked at the name still visible on the app screen. Thomas Reed. 46.8%. The app had already begun suggesting we connect. I sent him a message before I went to bed. I kept it brief. Hi, I think we may be related. I'd welcome a conversation when you have time. I pressed send and sat with the fact of it for a while, the fact that somewhere north of me there was a person whose blood was in my blood, who had grown up without knowing I existed, the same way I had grown up not knowing him. The same family secret running in two directions at once. He replied at 11:58 that night. I've been looking at these results for 3 hours. I don't know what to say except yes. Please call me whenever you're ready. I did not call Thomas Reed before I called my grandmother. Ruth Callahan is 81 years old and has lived alone in a one-story house in Cedar Grove since my grandfather passed 13 years ago. She has a hip that gives her trouble in cold weather and a mind that gives no one any trouble at all. Sharp, precise, the kind of person who remembers exact dates and exact words decades after they were spoken. She had been my single reliable source of warmth in the Callahan family, not the sweeping, unconditional warmth of storybooks, but something steadier, the warmth of a person who pays attention, who notices what is actually happening rather than what is being performed. I had noticed over the years that Ruth did not speak about my childhood in the same tone she used to speak about Celeste's. When Patricia mentioned Celeste's accomplishments at family dinners, Ruth listened politely. When someone mentioned mine, Ruth's face did something different. Something careful. A kind of stillness that I associated with restraint, with a person who has decided not to say the thing they are thinking. I called her at 8:30 on Wednesday morning. She picked up after one ring. I was wondering when you'd call, she said. I stopped. What do you mean? A pause that felt nothing like Patricia's pauses. Ruth's pauses are the pauses of someone organizing the truth, not concealing it. I mean that when Celeste mentioned the DNA kits at the rehearsal dinner, I started wondering how long it would take. I sat down. You knew. I knew something, she said carefully. I did not know the details. I knew that when your mother was pregnant with you, there was a period of several months where she and your father were not living in the same house. Robert had moved in with his brother. I assumed it was a rough patch. Most people assumed that. What I did not assume, but what I suspected, was that Patricia had not been alone during that time. Did you ever ask her? I asked her once. When you were about 4 years old. You were a serious little thing, even then. Watching everything. I remember looking at you at Easter dinner and thinking, this child does not look like Robert. Not the face, not the temperament. And I asked Patricia privately, after dinner. She told me I was seeing things. She asked me never to bring it up again. Ruth paused. And I didn't. Which I have thought about many times since. I pressed my palm flat against the kitchen counter. The grout between the tiles was cool under my hand. Why didn't you push it? Because what would I have pushed it toward? Her voice was quiet, not defensive. You were 4. She was your mother. Robert had come back and they were together again and you were in that house, and what was I supposed to do? Tell a 4-year-old that her father might not be her father? Pull on that thread in front of a child? A breath. I made the choice I made. I am not sure it was right. But I made it and then I lived with it, and every Christmas and every birthday I sat at that table and I watched how they treated you and I watched how they treated Celeste and I knew, Maya. I knew it wasn't right. Even if I couldn't say why. We stayed on the phone for another 40 minutes. By the time I hung up, I understood something I hadn't before, that Ruth had carried a version of this suspicion for 28 years, that it had sat in her like ballast, heavy and unspoken, tilting everything slightly without being visible. The weight of a secret you're not even supposed to know you're holding. She told me one more thing before we hung up. She told me that Thomas Reed was the name of a man who had worked at the architectural firm where Patricia had been a bookkeeper in the early 90s, before she married Robert and stopped working entirely. He had left Cedar Grove the year I was born. Ruth had never met him personally. But she had heard the name, once, in a conversation she was not meant to overhear, between Patricia and a friend, late at night at a Christmas party in 1991. She had stored the name the way careful people store things they might need later. In a place that kept it safe without requiring her to act on it. Thomas Reed was 59 years old. He had grown up in Cedar Grove, studied architecture in Ann Arbor, and spent the first decade of his career at a small firm in northern Michigan before starting his own practice in Traverse City. He was married with 3 adult children who were fully his wife's biological children. He had, according to his own message, taken the DNA test 6 months ago as a birthday gift from one of those children, who was curious about ethnic heritage. He had not expected to find a half-sibling. He had not expected to find anything except percentages. We spoke by video call on Thursday evening. He had my grandmother's eyes. Not Ruth Callahan's, the eyes of the woman in the photographs of Thomas Reed's mother that he shared with me during the call. Gray-green and specific. I had always thought my eyes were anomalous in the Callahan family. Robert's were brown. Patricia's were flat blue. Celeste's were the same flat blue. Mine were neither of those things. Thomas was careful. Measured. He was clearly a man who had been sitting with this for the better part of a week, who had thought through what he wanted to say and what he did not want to impose. He told me his mother had passed 3 years ago. He told me she had never spoken to him about Patricia Callahan. He had found a photograph while sorting her estate, a company photograph from the architectural firm, 1991. Patricia was in the back row. His mother had kept it in a box with other things from that period. He had not known what it meant until the DNA results arrived. "I'm not here to cause trouble for your family," he said. He meant it. You can hear when a person means something like that and when they're being diplomatic. He meant it. I just spent my whole career drawing blueprints of other people's structures. I'd like to understand the one I actually came from. I told him what I had told myself all week, that I didn't know yet what the full picture looked like. That I was meeting my mother the following Tuesday. That I would tell him what I learned. "Are you okay?" he asked before we signed off. Just those 3 words, with a directness that cut through the strangeness of the whole situation. A man I had spoken to for 40 minutes, who shared nearly half my DNA, asking if I was okay. "I think I'm still deciding," I said. He nodded slowly. "That sounds right," he said. "If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more stories like this one." Patricia arrived at my apartment at 7 on Tuesday evening. She was wearing the good coat, the charcoal wool one she reserves for occasions that matter. Her hair was done. Her composure was immaculate, the way a house looks immaculate when someone has spent the day cleaning it knowing company is coming. I had set 2 glasses of water on the kitchen table. No wine, no elaborate meal. Water and a table and 2 chairs facing each other. I wanted nothing in the room that could become a prop for her performance. She looked around my apartment with the appraising sweep she always gives spaces I inhabit, cataloging, measuring, noting what is present and what is not. Then she sat down, folded her hands, and looked at me with the expression of a woman who had decided on her version of events during the 3-hour drive and intended to deliver it. "I want to explain," she said. "Okay," I said. She told it in the voice she uses for difficult truths that she has practiced into manageability. Robert and she had been in trouble in 1991. Serious trouble. She did not go into details, but the implication was that he had strayed first, something she had found out, something that had produced the separation Ruth had noticed. During the months they were apart, Patricia had allowed herself, in her phrasing, a connection with someone from work. She had not expected it to produce a pregnancy. When she discovered she was pregnant, Robert had come back to the marriage, and they had agreed, together, she emphasized the word, to raise the child as his. "He knew," I said. "He always knew." I looked at the 2 glasses of water on the table. The ice had mostly melted. I had put the ice in 40 minutes before she arrived, when I was still trying to manage the small things to manage the feeling of managing nothing at all. "So the whole time," I said. "Every meal. Every birthday. Every college application that went nowhere." Patricia's jaw tightened just slightly. The composure held, but there was friction beneath it. "Robert tried," she said. He did try. You have to understand it was not an easy thing to ask of him. Something moved through me that was not quite anger, because anger has heat in it, and what I felt in that moment was cold and structural, the way a building is cold when the foundation shifts. You are explaining to me, I said slowly, that the reason my father served me half portions and skipped my school events and stared at the floor during the one toast he ever gave for me, the reason for all of it, is that you asked him to raise a child he knew wasn't his, and he tried but he didn't try very hard, and I was the one who lived in that. She did not answer. She looked at the window, then back at me. And you, I said. What's your explanation? The silence stretched. Then, I felt guilty, Maya. Every day. I want you to know that. Your guilt is not the same as consequence, I said. Guilt you felt inside. I lived the outside. Her chin dropped slightly. For just a moment, the composure gave way to something I had not seen on her face before, not tears, she is not a woman who cries easily, but something stripped. An expression without its usual architecture. She looked, for a moment, like a woman who was genuinely tired of carrying the shape of herself. Thomas Reed, I said. Did you stay in contact with him? No. Flat and immediate. He left Cedar Grove when I was 6 months along. He didn't know. I never told him. He has a DNA match to me now. He knows. Another silence. Does he want something? He wants to understand where he came from, I said. He's an architect. He spent 40 years building structures for other people. He just wants to know his own. I paused. He's a decent person. Which is something you could have simply told me years ago. Patricia pressed both hands flat on the table. The gesture of a woman stabilizing herself. I want you to understand that I love you, she said. That was never, stop, I said. She stopped. I know you believe that, I said. I'm not here to argue about whether you love me. I'm here to understand what happened and why. You've explained the what. The why I already know. You were managing Robert's willingness to stay, and the easiest way to manage it was to make sure he didn't have to look at me too long or too hard. You kept the differential small enough that it could always be explained by personality or preference or some other thing that had nothing to do with what it actually was. And I was the one who spent 32 years trying to figure out what I had done wrong. Patricia's eyes were bright but controlled. I never intended for you to, I know you didn't intend it, I said. That's almost the worst part. It was just practical. Every choice you made was practical. And I was the one it was practical about. She left at 9. She offered no reconciliation, no plan, no apology in the direct currency of an apology, just the word sorry said once in the doorway, quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. I watched her walk to her car from the window. She sat in the driver's seat for several minutes before she started the engine. I cleaned up the water glasses. I put the chairs back where they belonged. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time in the quiet of my own apartment, in the city I had moved to with 2 loans and a partial scholarship and no one helping me carry anything, and I thought about 32 years of a question that finally had an answer. It did not feel the way I expected. I had imagined, on and off over the years, that if I ever understood the logic behind what had been done to me, I would feel relief, the relief of resolution, of a story that finally made sense. What I felt instead was something more complicated. A grief that was not only for myself but for the child I had been, the serious little thing at the Easter table, watching everything, trying to earn something that had already been decided was not hers. She had not failed. There had simply been a structure she couldn't see, and she had been living inside it her entire life. The call I had not yet made was to Celeste. Celeste was back from her honeymoon. She had sent me a photo from Portugal the week before, her and Vincent on a terrace above the water, both of them squinting into the sun, both of them smiling. I had looked at the photo for a long time. She had Robert's coloring, his brown eyes, his way of leaning into a smile from one side. She was entirely his. And she had lived inside that family as entirely his, with everything that meant, while I had lived inside it as the opposite. I did not know how to have that conversation yet. I did not know what it would cost either of us. She had not chosen the arrangement any more than I had. She had simply been the one it favored, the same way I had simply been the one it didn't. What Patricia and Robert had built between them had used Celeste as the proof of their marriage and used me as the proof of its inconvenience, and neither of us had signed up for the roles we'd been cast in. I sent her a text the Thursday after Patricia's visit. "I need to talk to you about something. Not urgent, but important. Can we find time this week?" She called me within the hour. I told her everything. The DNA results. Thomas Reed. The conversation with Patricia. What Ruth had said. All of it, plainly, without softening and without weaponizing it. Celeste listened. She was quiet in a way that felt different from Patricia's strategic silences, a genuine, stunned quiet, the quiet of a person whose floor has shifted. "She told me it was a rough patch," Celeste said finally. "When I asked once, years ago, why you and Dad were never, why things felt different between you. She said you two were just different personalities. That some parent-child relationships were naturally harder. Did you believe that?" A pause. I wanted to believe it. I think I mostly did. "I know," I said. "Maya." Her voice was unsteady. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what that's worth right now. I'm so sorry." What it was worth, I told her, was something. Not everything. But something. We talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, Celeste had asked me one question that mattered more than most of the others: "What do you want to happen now?" I had been thinking about that question for 10 days. What I wanted was not a complicated emotional restoration. What I wanted was specific. "I want Robert to say it to my face," I said. "Not to Patricia, not to Celeste, to me. I want to be in a room with him and I want him to acknowledge what I was in that house and why. Not because I think it will fix anything. Because I have spent 32 years being treated as though my perception of my own childhood was wrong, and I am done accepting that." Celeste said, "Then let's get you in that room." The occasion arrived 4 days later. My parents were hosting a small dinner, a belated post-wedding celebration for the extended family who hadn't made it to the ceremony. 12 people, the living room set up with folding tables, the good dishes out the way Patricia brings them out for things that need to look like occasions. Celeste called me 2 days before and told me Robert didn't know I was coming. She had arranged it without his input, told Patricia only that she had invited me, and used her status as the newly married daughter whose goodwill neither parent was willing to jeopardize to ensure the invitation held. She was learning, my sister. 30 years of being the favored child, and she was only just now understanding what the favor had cost the person beside her. I arrived at the Cedar Grove house at 6:45. The driveway held 3 unfamiliar cars and my grandmother's old sedan. Ruth was already inside, which I had not expected and which I understood immediately was not an accident. She had come because Celeste had asked her to come, and she had come because she had been waiting 28 years to be in the room when this happened. Robert was standing near the kitchen doorway with a glass of beer when I walked in. He saw me and his expression moved through 3 things in 2 seconds: surprise, assessment, and then the particular neutral that men like Robert Callahan produce when they have decided to weather something rather than address it. I did not give him the weather. I said hello to the cousins, to the aunt from Patricia's side who I saw twice a year, to Vincent, who squeezed my shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. I sat where Celeste indicated, across the room from my parents, and I waited. Dinner passed. Robert carved the roast. Patricia served. The conversation moved through the honeymoon, through Vincent's job, through a cousin's new baby, through the usual tributaries of family gatherings. I ate and spoke when spoken to and watched my father across the folding tables. He did not look at me more than 3 times during the meal. When he did, he looked away first. Dessert was being cleared when Patricia stood up to propose a toast. She lifted her glass and spoke about Celeste and Vincent and new beginnings and love. She used the phrase "our family" 4 times. Each time she said it, I watched Robert's face. He was looking at his wine glass. When she finished and everyone drank, I set my glass down and spoke into the quiet that follows a toast, before the conversation picks back up. "I'd like to say something, if that's okay." The room shifted the way a room does when someone departs from the script. Patricia's eyes found mine. Robert's went to the table. "I got my DNA results back from the test at Celeste's wedding," I said. My voice was level. Conversational. An accountant reading findings. I matched Celeste at full sibling range, which I expected. I also matched a man named Thomas Reed at nearly 47%. For those of you who aren't familiar with DNA percentages, that's the range for a biological parent or a full sibling. I looked around the table. I don't have a brother. Which means he's a parent. The room was very still. Thomas Reed worked at the architectural firm in Cedar Grove in 1991, when my mother was the bookkeeper there. He left the same year I was born. He didn't know she was pregnant. He took a DNA test 6 months ago as a birthday gift from his children and spent 32 years not knowing he had a daughter. I looked at Robert. And Robert Callahan spent 32 years knowing he did. The silence after that was the kind that has weight. The kind you can feel on your skin. The aunt from Patricia's side put her fork down on her plate. A cousin I had barely spoken to in a decade was staring at the centerpiece. Vincent had his hand on Celeste's arm. Ruth, at the far end of the table, sat perfectly still, her hands folded, her eyes on her son. Robert did not say anything for a long time. He sat with his wine glass and the remains of his dinner and the 12 people in the room who had just heard his name attached to a specific truth in a specific sentence. When he finally looked up, he looked at me, and for the first time in my memory, he did not look away. "I know," he said. 2 words. 32 years of silence, and what he offered was 2 words, quiet, the way a man sounds when he has put something down that was too heavy to carry further and too complicated to explain. I'm not sure he meant them as an apology. I'm not sure they were enough to be one. But they were the first time Robert Callahan had looked at me and told the truth at the same time. I held his gaze for a full 5 seconds. Then I said, "I know you do." And I turned back to the room, and I let the silence do the rest. The dinner ended the way things end when the truth has finally been said in a room, not with a scene, not with shouting, but with people quietly gathering their things and finding reasons to leave. The aunt from Patricia's side hugged me on her way out, said nothing, held on a beat longer than usual. The cousins filtered out with careful goodbyes. Vincent drove Celeste home. Robert stayed at the table after everyone left, staring at his hands, and Patricia stood at the kitchen sink with her back to the room, running the water for longer than anything needed washing. Ruth waited until it was just the 3 of us. Then she stood, put on her coat, and walked past Robert without a word. At the front door she turned and looked at him, not with cruelty, not with triumph, just with the long, steady gaze of a woman who has been waiting a very long time to stop pretending. Then she looked at me. "Come for coffee Thursday," she said. I told her I would. The consequences that followed were not dramatic. They were the quiet kind, which in a town like Cedar Grove are often worse. The story moved the way stories move in small places, through cousins, through church acquaintances, through the careful omissions in conversations that signal something has shifted. Robert stepped back from his usher role at Grace Fellowship within the month. Patricia stopped hosting the extended family gatherings she had organized for 2 decades. Not because anyone told them to. Because walking into those rooms had become a different thing. Thomas Reed drove to Detroit in June. We met for lunch at a restaurant I chose near my office, neutral ground, somewhere I felt like myself. He brought a photograph of the architectural firm from 1991. I brought nothing except the willingness to sit across from a stranger who was not a stranger and figure out what we were to each other. What we are, 3 months later, is careful and real. We text occasionally. He sent me a photograph of a bookshelf he designed for a client, quarter sawn oak, clean lines. I sent him a note from a client who had just closed their cleanest fiscal year. Small things. The beginning of a language between two people who came to each other late and are building something without a blueprint. Robert has not called. I have not called him. The door is not locked, but I am not standing at it. Celeste calls every Sunday. That is new. That is something. My grandmother has a purple ceramic mug she bought at a market last summer. She uses it every morning. She told me once that she bought it because it was the most cheerful thing on the table and she had spent enough years choosing the sensible option. I think about that sometimes when the sensible option presents itself. I spent 32 years trying to earn a place in a family that had already decided what my place was. I am done earning. I know whose blood is in me now. I know what I built with my own hands. And I know, for the first time in my life, that the story I was handed at birth was not the only story available to me. I just had to be the one to write a different one. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.